Hey, sixth graders, what's up? So, you are on page 68 in your math book, so make sure you're there. Pause the video to go get it if you are not. So, you're going to be working on some problems here. No calculator allowed. You're going to be working on 1 through 6 on page 68 and 69. So, as you go through these, some of these are easier than others, some of them are trickier than others. But I want you to give it your best shot. As soon as you're done with 1 through 6, you're going to restart the video and watch it and make corrections. Now, the one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say you do not need to do, yes, you need to do number 3, but you don't need to do this middle part. All right, you only need to do the top one and the bottom one of number 3. Okay, so anyway, pause the video. Do 1 through 6. When you're done, restart it. Go. So, let's see how you did. So, as we go through these, I want you to mark them right or wrong and see how you did. So, number 1 says, what is the value of the expression 3/8 divided by 1.5? So, first thing, did you remember to change this to 3/2? So, we have 3/8 divided by 3/2. Don't forget that. Next, did you multiply 3/8 by the reciprocal? 3/8 times 2/3. Next, did you multiply and get 6/24? And did you reduce that to get 1/4? So 1/4 is the answer, D. If you had it, give yourself a C. If not, what I want you to do is pause this, look at the work I just did, make your correction and learn from it, and then restart the video. Okay, so let's go on to 2. Now, 2 says, find the expression that does not answer the question, what fraction is 8 of 8 is 2.5? So what that means, that of these answer choices, 3 of them would answer that question. We have to find the one that would not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of mess around and see how I would solve this. So if I had to find what fraction of 8, here's what I would think. What fraction of 8 is 2.5? Okay? And I also know that of means multiply. And notice, if I get rid of the of and replace it with multiply, that's D, right? So we know D is not the answer because we're looking for the one that would not answer that question, and D would answer that question. Okay. Next, I also know a multiplication problem with a missing factor can be rewritten by doing the opposite. So I start with 2.5 and I divide it by 8. And that would get me my missing number. Notice that's A. So it cannot be A. Now, I also think I know the answer, because now look here. A and C are opposites of each other. So if A would get that answer, that means C would not. So the answer's got to be C, because notice C is the same numbers, just in reverse. All right, but how would they have gotten B? Let's talk about that one. So if I were solving this problem, 2.5 divided by 8. Now first, remember 8 can be written as 8 over 1. I would change 2.5 to 5/2 divided by 8 over 1, right? Oops, I'm sorry, I wrote multiplication. So if I then solved it, I would have to do 5/2 times the reciprocal 1/8. And isn't that B? All right, so the one that would not answer that question was definitely C. If you had that one right, give yourself a C. Okay, so now we get down to 3. And 3 says the area of one dimension of a piece of land, the area and one dimension of a piece of land are given. From the choices on the left, write the fraction inside each box that represents the second dimension of a piece of land described. Now here's what I want you to think of. Whenever we find area, we always do area of a rectangle is the length times the width, right? So in the first one, It says the area of a rectangular piece of land is 1/2 square mile. So the area is 1/2, and that equals whatever the length and the width are. So one dimension of the piece of land is 7/8 times the other dimension, which is one of those numbers in the box. Now here's one thing you could do. You could go through and do 7/8 times 3/7, 7/8 times 7. You can go through and multiply until you get 1/2. I don't want to do that. I don't know about you. So to solve that, I'm going to rewrite it. Hold on one second. So I'm going to put the equals 1/2 on this side because I like the way it looks better. So remember, if you multiply these two dimensions, 7/8 times something, you have to get 1/2 to get the area, right? So this is a multiplication problem with a missing factor. So remember, you just write it in reversed order. So if you take 1/2 and divide it by 7/8, you should get the missing dimension. Now, to do that, I do 1/2 times 8/7, which is 8/14, but I have to reduce. Divide by 2, divide by 2, and I get 4/7. So that is what should go in the first box. So did you have 4/7 in that box? Now, I would say if you didn't, and you didn't know how to do this problem, what I would do now is pause it and do this bottom one now that you know how to do it, and then restart the video. If you did the first one right and you had 4/7, well, just keep watching the video and see if you got the bottom one right. So the bottom one says the area of a rectangular piece of land is 2/3. One dimension is 1.5 miles. So that means 1.5 times the other dimension in that box has to equal 2/3. Now, I don't want to start multiplying around until I get it. So what I'm going to do is change it to a division problem. So you start with the 2/3 and divide by 1.5, and I should get the number in the box. Now, don't forget to change 1.5 to 3/2. And now I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. 2/3 times the reciprocal of 3/2 is 2/3 equals 4/9. That is what should go in that box, and I see it right there. All right, if you had both of those right, they were tricky problems. By the way, the reason I didn't have you do that middle one is because we were dealing with a triangle, and that made it way harder, and I didn't want you to get messed up. Okay, so we're done on page 68. Remember, if you got any wrong, I want you to pause the video to make corrections and think about what you did wrong. But now we're going on to page 69. So on 69, it says, write each expression in the correct column to show whether the quotient is less than, greater than, or equal to 1. All right, now I'm going to try to do whatever I can to not solve each one of these, because that will take a long time. So remember, each one of these is either going to have a quotient is answer less than 1, equal to 1, or greater than 1. So 3/4, let's start with this one. 3/4 divided by 1/2 is the same as 3/4 times 2/1. Now, if I double 3/4, I know my answer is going to be greater than 1. So 3/4 divided by 1/2 should be in that box. Okay, so now, in the next one, 2/9 times 27 is definitely, if I were to multiply that, like 2 times 27 is 54, it's definitely going to be greater than 1. So 2/9 divided by 1/27 is greater than 1. Okay, so do you have those in the right spot? Now, if you weren't doing this right, notice I'm not actually getting the answer. I'm just using some thinking here. So the third one, if I had 4/3 times 3/5. So I'm not sure about this one. So let me actually, that's 12 That's 15. So that's less than 1 because 12/15 is less than a whole. So 4/3 divided by 3/5 goes in that box. So that's one where I actually solved it. Maybe you didn't have to solve it. All right, so now let's go to this one. 1/2 times 4/3, this one's easy to solve, is 4/6, and that's less than 1. So 1/2 divided by 3/4. Okay, so now let's do the one I'm circling in red. So we have 5/3 times 6/20. And that would get me 30/60. So that would get me half. So because 30/60 is half, which is less than 1. So 5/3 divided by 20/6 is less than 1. And then we make some room here. This one. So 2 3/8. First off, that's 16, 17, 18, 19. That's 19/8. So I'm going to write that down here real quick. So I changed that to 19/8. And if I do 19/8 times 8/19, anytime you multiply a number by its reciprocal, you will always get 1. So that one, ladies and gentlemen, without even solving it, because that would be a pain in the butt, is exactly equal to 1. 19/8 divided by 2 3/8. So here's my question. Did you get all those? Interesting. All right, so number 5 says, explain the difference between dividing in half and dividing by half using pictures, models, or numbers. Okay, so pictures, models, or numbers. So I'm going to try to use pictures. All right. So if let's say I'm going to do 6 divided in half. So 6 divided in half means I'm going to take 6 and I'm going to cut it in half. So if I did 6 divided in half, I'm actually dividing it by 2, and that gets me 3. But what about dividing 6 by half? So let's say I do 6 divided by half, which is different than 6 divided by 2. So if I have 6 of something, and I split them each in half. Remember, 6 divided by half means how many halves are in 6. So I'm going to count them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's a totally different thing. So 6 divided by half is the same as 6 times 2, which is 12. So notice these are two totally different problems. All right? And now 6 says, write a story problem to represent 6 divided by 3/4. Draw a model and use multiplication to show the solution. Explain how the dividend, divisor, and quotient relate in the story. All right. So what I'm going to do for this one, so for 6 divided by 3/4, I basically want to know how many 3/4 are in 6, right? So I'm going to say, let's say I have 6 gallons of water and need to split it into 3/4 gallon jugs. How many jugs will I have? Because remember, I'm going to find out how many 3/4 are in 6. So to do this, it says draw a model and use multiplication. So I'm going to do 6 of something. Actually, let me draw it up here. I have 6 of something. And I have to split each of these 6, these represent my 6 gallons, into fourths. And my answer is going to be how many 3/4 can I get out of 6? So now I'm going to circle them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So my answer I know is going to be 8. Now it says draw a model and use multiplication to show the solution. So the answer is 8. So now I'm going to do a division problem. So remember, 6 over 1 divided by 3/4 becomes 6 over 1 times 4/3, which is 24/3. And 24 divided by 3 is 8. So that's how you do it with a math problem, but I get 8 either way. So explain how the dividend, divisor, and quotient relate to the story. All right, so let me think. The dividend is 6. That's the number you divide. So it's 6 gallons. I have. I'm dividing it into 3/4. So that's the divisor. Whatever you divide by is divisor. So the 3/4 gallon jugs. And my quotient is my answer. So the quotient was 8. So I can get 8 jugs from 6 gallons. All right, so now that's all I had to do for 6. That was a lot, I will give you that. So just make sure yours might be different, and you don't have to have, you're probably not going to have mine, right? But you have a model, you did a math problem, you solved it, you should have 8 from your model in your math problem. You should have a word problem where you're doing something with 6 being split into 3/4. Okay, it's not going to be the same as mine. And did you explain what your 6 was, what your 3/4 was, and what your 8 was? They're all the things that you had to do. All right, so remember, you can pause this video and make any corrections you need to. This was a tough practice, I'll give you that, so don't be discouraged if you had any trouble with these. But, as always, thanks for watching. You are done with me. Peace out.